This movie is going to explain exactly what is going to happen at the end of 2012 and after that. It's going to show you everything you need to know so you and the people around you and the people you care about can be safe. The world is not going to end, but it is probably a lot worse than you think. By the end it will be very obvious, so you'll know exactly what to do about it. This took me 5 months to make, so with the amount of time we have left, this may be our last chance to see the truth about what's actually happening. It is going to disprove every false religion in the world along with zeitgeist and evolution. It's also going to show that the majority of the population have been mentally and spiritually conditioned to run, get mad, or uncomfortable at the mention of two words: Jesus and the Bible. If you had any negative thoughts after those two words, either you had a bad experience somewhere or it's coming from the side of darkness. Either way, it's not natural as a human to be negatively affected by those two words. Once you understand spiritual warfare, you'll understand that your mind is the battlefield, and we'll look at that later. Don't let those two words prevent you from finding out the truth and knowing exactly what's coming so you can be prepared for it. But the next and most important thing it's going to prove is that Jesus, the Son of God, died on the cross and rose after 3 days to take the punishment for every sin of every human being on earth once and for all. So if we accept that, we can be forgiven, follow Him, and have eternal life with Him in heaven. It's going to prove heaven and hell are real and that Jesus is the only way to heaven. All other paths lead to hell. Prove Satan, demons, angels, and God are all real and show what they are like. It's going to show exactly what happens when we die, which is probably the most important thing in everybody's life. It's also going to prove that just as we all enjoy movies where the good guy wins in the end, I'm going to prove that we are all actually in a movie where the good guy wins in the end. It's going to show the truth about every president, every Holocaust. It's going to show exactly what is going on with crop circles, UFOs, Nibiru, or Planet X, as some people call it, Gaza Strip, West Bank, the Pyramid, Stonehenge, and the Battle of Armageddon. Everything on that list so far is all tied together. None of it makes sense without all of it, but it will all make perfect sense by the end. You need to watch for snakes, pyramids, Mayans, Assyrians, Babylon, Egypt, eyes, winged creatures, obelisks, Sanskrit, pentagrams, England, the Vatican, and the US government. You can't find any of this information on the news. This is not a fictional movie. There's 50 lifetimes of knowledge from professional study in here, something you or I will never have. And it's all from a credible source. There's a list of where to find all this information at the end if you want to look at it for yourself. It's all free. It is as short as possible, but to show the truth about everything in here and everything that's coming, it couldn't be any shorter. It's going to take about 7 hours. Every second of video is in here for a reason. It all ties together. Everything at the beginning ties into stuff at the end. So if you skip ahead, you'll miss something and the rest won't make sense. This may upset some people and I apologize in advance. There is a lot of bad news, but there is no other way to show the truth without looking at the bad news. And that's the goal, is to know the truth, look at and understand exactly what's coming so we know how to be prepared. And we will know exactly what to watch for and how to avoid it or deal with it and keep ourselves and the people around us safe. It's better to figure it out now before it's too late. And there is also a lot of the best news you've ever heard in here, so it's not all bad. Everybody will learn something from this. This will be the most important 7 hours of your life, and it will change your life. We are all in danger for a number of reasons, and there's a good chance we could be in serious or life-threatening danger over the next few months if we don't know what to watch for. So please stick it out to the very end. It should show you everything you need to know in the world at this point, and the only way out of the mess we're in. We are going to go off into the conspiracy realm in certain parts, but it's necessary to pull the truth out of it. The news doesn't show us exactly what's going on. Don't watch this video with young kids. There is nothing vulgar in it, but some parts are graphic. Certain parts are choppy because there's a lot of info from a lot of different places. I'm also going to tell you what happened to me as we go. I had the best job I could ever imagine, fell off the wagon, ended up in rehab, and I'll finish the rest as we go. We're going to start with the bad news and the good news after. We're going to spend the most time on Islam because it's the biggest problem the entire world is facing at this point, and a big part of the reason why we are all in danger, and this will show you why. Listen to what the Pope says here because we're coming back to it.
John Paul II has gathered leaders of the world's major religions a number of times and embraced them all as worshippers of the true God, including Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, animists, Shintoists, shamans, witches, and others. He told Hindu audiences in India that he had not come to teach them anything, but to learn from their rich spiritual heritage, to which the entire world ought to give heed. Everyone is embraced by Rome, except evangelical Christians, whom the Pope calls sects, and warns Catholics against their errors, as he did in Mexico City in May 1990, and elsewhere since that time.
Let's look at Islam.
In Islamic thinking, the world is divided into the house of Islam, where Islamic polity has been established, where Allah rules supreme, and the house of war, which is the rest of the world. This dichotomy is reminiscent of other totalitarian ideologies, and most explicitly communism. Both communism and Islam seek the end of history in this world.
Allah's apostle said, "I have been ordered to fight with the people till they say, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah."
What the West needs to understand about Islam is that Islam has the potential of replacing the dangers that we just kind of did away with, Nazism and communism. Like Nazism and like communism, Islamism, the end justifies the means. There is no respect for national borders, and the whole ideology is to promote their way of thinking and promote their way of life throughout the entire world. That's what's being taught in the Middle East. That's what's being coming out from all the jurisprudence in Al-Azhar in Saudi Arabia and all throughout the Muslim world, is that Islam will conquer and will continue to conquer until it triumphs, until everybody in the world says there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet.
The meaning of this, and this is a very mysterious symbol, which you've heard all sorts of explanations for it, but I'm going to give you the Masonic Illuminati inner meaning of what this means tonight. And it's going to probably gross you out and astonish you, and I apologize in advance for that. But this is what it means. Crowley reveals the secret behind the all-seeing eye symbol in one of his books, the Book of Thoth, which is a very advanced manual on tarot card readings. And this is the eye of Lucifer.
Okay, let's look at Freemasons. Masons who have reached such degrees as 32nd and 33rd degree are not called Masons, they are Muslim Shriners. When you take the 33rd degree, you are taught to greet each other, Assalamu alaikum. You are taught Islam from then on because you become a Muslim when that degree is conferred on you.
The meaning of this, and this is a very mysterious symbol, which, you've heard all sorts of explanations for it, but I'm going to give you the Masonic Illuminati inner meaning of what this means tonight. And it's going to probably gross you out and astonish you, and I apologize in advance for that. But this is what it means. Crowley reveals the secret behind the all-seeing eye symbol in one of his books, the Book of Thoth, which is a very advanced manual on tarot card readings. And this is the eye of Lucifer.
The Quran is the Muslim's holy book. We need to know where he got it.
أعزائي المشاهدين، قبل أن نبدأ في تفصيل الموضوع ومناقشته الذي هو هل القرآن وحي من الله، نحب أولا أن نعرض قصة بدء الوحي، وهي مأخوذة من كتب السيرة ومن الصحيحين، صحيح البخاري وصحيح مسلم، فنقدمها للمشاهدين حتى تكون نقطة انطلاق هذا النقاش. لنتابع معا القصة. بعدما مضى على زواج محمد من خديجة حوالي 20 سنة وقبل بلوغه 40، كان يترك زوجته وأبناءه وبيته بمكة متجها إلى غار حراء، قاطعا مسافة تقارب 4 كيلومترات. هذا الغار يقع في أعلى الجبل على علو 630 مترا، وهو عبارة عن فجوة صغيرة طولها 4 أذرع وعرضها حوالي 1.5 ذراع، بالكاد تتسع ل4 أشخاص. هذه المسافة تستغرق 3 ساعات أو أكثر مشيا على الأقدام. كان يختلي في هذا الغار لوحده الليالي ذوات العدد، ولم يكن يعود لبيته ولا لزوجته وأولاده إلا ليأخذ أكلا وزادا ثم يعود للغار من جديد. جد محمد عبد المطلب كان يختلي بهذا الغار أيضا، وآخرون من أبناء قبيلته سبق وفعلوا نفس الشيء، حيث اجتمع 4 أشخاص ذات يوم فيما بينهم واتفقوا على أن يهجروا أصنام قريش ويعبدوا الله وحده، وهم ورقة بن نوفل وهو ابن عم خديجة، عبيد الله بن جحش وهو ابن عمة محمد، عثمان بن الحويرث وهو ابن عم خديجة أيضا، ثم زيد بن عمرو ابن نفيل. 3 من بين هؤلاء ال4 تنصروا، والرابع بقي من غير دين. سنة 610 للميلاد، وذات ليلة من ليالي اختلاء محمد وفي أواخر شهر رمضان الذي كان شهرا مقدسا عند العرب قبل الإسلام أيضا، قال محمد بأن كائنا ما قد أتاه هناك وقال له: اقرأ. فرد محمد: ما أنا بقارئ. فأخذه هذا الكائن وضمه بشدة وقوة حتى كاد أن يخنقه، ثم أرسله، وتكرر الأمر 3 مرات. حينها قال الكائن: اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق، خلق الإنسان من علق. انطلق محمد من غاره يجري، ودخل فجأة على زوجته خديجة مذعورا ويرتعد صائحا: زملوني زملوني، أو دثروني دثروني، ومعناهما معا: غطوني غطوني. كان محمد في قمة الخوف. استفسرته خديجة عن الخبر فأخبرها القصة كاملة. كان غير متأكد مما رآه، هل شيطان أم ملك؟ فقال لها بالحرف: قد خشيت على نفسي.
Muhammad was woken from sleep and felt himself absolutely enveloped by a terrifying divine presence. He says it's an angel that seemed to squeeze him in a devastating embrace, and it felt as though all the breath was being squeezed out of his body.
Okay, so when I first got to rehab, I had a dream about the counselor that I met there and a demon. 3 weeks into it, I was totally clean and sober. I woke up in my room the most scared I've ever been in my entire life, and I opened my eyes and the demon was right in front of me. Thousands of people have testified to being choked by demons. This part is kind of disturbing, but we need to know that the spiritual realm is real. I'll show you the good side later on.
Assalamu alaikum. Many other Americans have Muslims in their families or have lived in a Muslim majority country. I know because I am one of them. But my father came from a Kenyan family that includes generations of Muslims. As a boy, I spent several years in Indonesia and heard the call of the azan at the break of dawn. I have known Islam on 3 continents before coming to the region where it was first revealed. As the Holy Quran tells us, the Holy Quran teaches that, the Holy Quran tells us, and the Holy Quran also says, Islam is not part of the problem in combating violent extremism. It is an important part of promoting peace. The enduring faith of over 1 billion people is so much bigger than the narrow hatred of a few. In the United States, rules on charitable giving have made it harder for Muslims to fulfill their religious obligation. That's why I'm committed to working with American Muslims to ensure that they can fulfill zakat. It is important for Western countries to avoid impeding Muslim citizens from practicing religion as they see fit. And I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they appear. We are no longer a Christian nation.
We do not consider ourselves a Christian nation.
The United States has been enriched by Muslim Americans. Since our founding, American Muslims have enriched the United States. Islam has always been a part of America's story. There is a mosque in every state in our union, and over 1,200 mosques within our borders.
You know, one of the points I want to make is that if you actually took the number of Muslims, Americans, we'd be one of the largest Muslim countries in the world.
Let there be no doubt, Islam is a part of America.
Presidential candidate Barack Obama is trying to change political fashion. He gave a speech in Iowa City today, and he wasn't wearing an American flag pin. Those pins have become synonymous with politicians since 9/11. Obama says he doesn't like how the pin has come to represent patriotism in America.
I won't wear that pin on my chest.
It's a little weird, Alan, that in the middle of the campaign the guy takes off the American flag that most people wear because they're proud of their country.
Let me speak as clearly and as plainly as I can. America is not and never will be at war with Islam.
Islam is a peaceful and tolerant religion, and the acts of these people are wholly contrary to the teachings of the Quran.
I also want to speak tonight directly to Muslims throughout the world. We respect your faith. It's practiced freely by many millions of Americans, and by millions more in countries that America counts as friends. Its teachings are good and peaceful, and those who commit evil in the name of Allah blaspheme the name of Allah. The terrorists
I want you to understand, I want the world to understand that our actions today were not aimed against Islam. The faith of hundreds of millions of good, peace-loving people all around the world, including the United States. No religion condones the murder of innocent men, women, and children. But our actions were aimed at fanatics and killers who wrap murder in the cloak of righteousness, and in so doing, profane the great religion in whose name they claim to act.
They keep insisting that Islam is a peaceful religion. One of the most important things we need to understand is what Islam is really like.
The prophet said, "War is deceit,
when one is under pressure, one may lie in order to protect the religion. This is taught in the Quran, chapter 3, verse 28, chapter 16, verse 106.
Muhammad himself ordered people to lie. When people that he ordered to go and kill somebody, they told him, we cannot kill him unless we lie to that person. He said, okay, fine, lie.
The origins are, of course, in the Muslim desire to impose all over the world the only religion, the only just religion, which is Islam, and the suppression of all other religions in order to establish the rule of Allah over the whole earth. This is a religious duty which binds the whole community, and which the Muslim community is obliged to impose, because they are obliged to obey the order of Allah, and this is the desire of Allah as expressed in the Quranic revelation.
Authoritative Islamic History, The Life of Muhammad, Sirat Rasulullah, by Muhammad bin Ishaq, edited by Abdul Malik bin Hisham, translated by Professor Alfred Guillaume. Then the Qurayza tribe surrendered, and the apostle confined them in Medina. Then the apostle went out to the market of Medina and dug trenches in it. Then he sent for them and struck off their heads in those trenches as they were brought out to him in batches. There were 600 or 700 in all, though some put the figure as high as 800 or 900.
Another example, that may be even more chilling, of the deleterious influence that Muhammad's example has upon the Islamic world was exemplified recently by an Egyptian leader of a radical Muslim party who wrote just recently that he couldn't believe that the beheadings in Iraq were being protested by Muslims. Weren't they aware that the Prophet Muhammad himself beheaded between 600 and 900 men personally, members of the Jewish Qurayza tribe in Arabia, after he had defeated them? Didn't they realize that if the Prophet did it, then this was the proper way to behave? And so the Mujahideen in Iraq, who are beheading people, are simply obeying the example of the Prophet. Now we can see then that since the Prophet Muhammad himself participated in many battles and raids, and did indeed perpetrate these beheadings, he ordered the assassination of several of his political opponents, and he behaved in general like a typical 7th century warlord. The problem is that when this is transferred to 21st century behavior, 21st century contexts of behavior, then what you get are terrorists. The Quran occupies a place that has no parallel in Western civilization. The Quran is considered by Muslims and by traditional Islamic theology to be dictated word for word by God himself, by Allah himself, through the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad. As a result, every word of it is the words of God himself. Every word of the Quran, unless it is canceled by another section of the Quran itself, is valid for all time and cannot be questioned, cannot be reformed, cannot be changed within an Islamic context. This means that moderate Muslims, peaceful Muslims, if they are sincere, have to reject entirely Quranic literalism. But to do so puts them outside the sphere of anything that has been considered Orthodox Islam throughout history. because to do so is to reject the very basic premise of Islam, that this is a book that is dictated by God and is a perfect copy of a perfect book, the al-Kitab, the mother of the book that has existed forever with Allah in heaven.
The Noble Quran, translated with parenthetical notes by Dr. Muhammad Taqi-ud-Din al-Hilali and Dr. Muhammad Muhsin Khan. Surah 98, verse 6. Verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, and al-Mushrikun, other disbelievers, will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures.
So the Quran is simply a set of direct commandments or else narratives, descriptions, sometimes very distorted descriptions of Judaism and Christianity. Because of the normative nature of those commandments, the second important body for Islamic jurisprudence and for Islamic polity is the tradition of the Prophet, the Hadith.
Now, the Hadith are absolutely necessary to make any sense of the Quran, because Allah addresses Muhammad in the Quran, and they talk about incidents in Muhammad's life, but they don't fill in the narrative details. So you have to go to the Hadith, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, in order to understand what's being said in the Quran and why. The Hadith are many, many volumes of traditions of the Prophet. Various Muslim scholars, beginning in the 8th century, which is some considerable time after the life of the Prophet Muhammad, who died in 632, they started to collect these traditions and to try, through various means, to winnow out the authentic ones from the inauthentic. From an Islamic standpoint, if something that Muhammad said or did is recorded in one of those books, then it has authority second only to the Quran. And in those books, there is a great deal that illuminates what the Quran says and how it is applicable to Muslims in the present.
Authoritative traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, the Hadiths of Sahih al-Bukhari, translated with parenthetical notes by Dr. Muhammad Muhsin Khan. Volume 4, Book 52, Hadith number 53. The Prophet said, "Nobody who dies and finds good from Allah in the hereafter would wish to come back to this world even if he were given the whole world and whatever is in it, except the martyr who, on seeing the superiority of martyrdom, would like to come back to the world and get killed again in Allah's cause." The Prophet said, "A single endeavor of fighting in Allah's cause, in the afternoon or in the forenoon, is better than all the world and whatever is in it."
And in those books we have very clear instructions from the Prophet Muhammad that it is the responsibility of Muslims to meet the unbelievers on the battlefield, to invite them either to accept Islam or to accept second-class dhimmi status in the Islamic State. And if they refuse both of those, then to wage war against them.
Fight against those who believe not in Allah, nor in the last day, nor forbid that which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger. And fight against those who acknowledge not the religion of truth, Islam, among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya, the poll tax, with willing submission, and feel themselves subdued.
The Quran is broken down into two sections. One is called Makkiyah, which means what was inspired to Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, in Mecca. And one is called Madaniyah, what was inspired to the Prophet of Islam in Medina or Yathrib. In Mecca, you find much of the peaceful verses. Muhammad used to live with the Jewish community and the Christian community in peace and harmony, so there was many verses. in the Quran that even the Muslims used to worship in the direction of prayer towards Jerusalem. They saw many elements of a unity between the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim faith.
There are indeed some verses in the Quran that could be called peaceful and tolerant, notably the injunction against compulsion in religion. Those verses almost invariably date back to the beginnings of Muhammad's prophetic career in his native city of Mecca, where he was powerless, where he was only beginning to attract followers. Well, it all changes with the establishment of Muhammad's theocratic statelet in the city of Medina. He becomes a warlord, he becomes the head of a totalitarian state, he becomes very rich, very powerful, and very intolerant. And then many of these early verses, in fact, get abrogated.
In Surah 2, verse 106 of the Quran, it says, or Allah says, I should say, that if we abrogate, we being Allah, abrogate a verse, then we'll give you one that's better.
Whatever a verse, revelation, do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, we bring a better one or similar to it. Know you not that Allah is able to do all things?
Now the violence started. Now you had to weigh between peaceful verses and non-peaceful verses. So the edict was that these were made null and void.
It is indeed a very curious concept for a non-Muslim to accept the notion that God may change his mind about a topic and may issue one injunction in AD 614 and then a very different one in AD 627. But this is indeed what has happened in Islam.
The peaceful verses became mansukha, means made null and void, with verses like the verses of the sword.
Traditional Islamic theology has it that the 9th chapter of the Quran, Surah 9, is the last revealed in the career of the Prophet. And it is the only one that doesn't begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. Some have said that that's because there's no compassion or mercy in this particular chapter, and that it is the Quran's last word on jihad, and in particular on how Muslims should behave toward unbelievers. In it is the celebrated verse of the sword.
And what does the verse of the sword say? It's very clear. That when the forbidden months are over, kill the people of the book wherever you find them. Lay siege for them, lay wait for them, lay ambush for them. Kill them wherever you find them. In fact, I converted to Christianity. Muhammad clearly stated that in the ends of days, there will be many who defect from the faith. Kill them when you see them, wherever you find them. So, this is the question that the West needs to understand. What part of kill don't they understand?
You said that the President reiterated the message of tolerance and the importance that this is not a campaign against Islam or Arab nations generally. Has it been communicated to the administration from those nations, from that part of the world that you've been talking to recently, that is a highly critical thing for the President to do, not just once, but over and over and over again? So why?
We are a country that judges people not by their religious beliefs or by their color, but by the fact that we're all Americans. So that was the first part of the message. The second part of the message is that we have a lot of friends around the world who are Muslim. We have countries that are long friends of the United States who are of the Islamic faith, and the President wanted to be very clear that this is not a war of, quote, civilizations, that this is not a war against Islam. This is a war against people who in many ways pervert what Islam stands for. Islam stands for peace and stands for nonviolence, and he wanted to make that very, very clear. Yeah, sure.
Islam and Islamic civilization are unique in their stance toward non-believers. and that Islam is the only religion in the world that has a developed doctrine, theology, and law that mandates violence against unbelievers. That there are peaceful Muslims, there are Muslims around the world who are moderate, who live in harmony with their non-Muslim neighbors and have no intention of ever waging war against them in any way. But the fact is that they have a very slim justification for their own peacefulness within the Islamic sources themselves. And they are only at peace with their neighbors insofar as they are either ignorant of what Islam teaches about how Muslims should behave toward unbelievers, or they have explicitly rejected, consciously rejected, those elements of Islam. There are, in short, peaceful and moderate Muslims, but no peaceful and moderate Islam. The idea that Islam is a religion of peace, however, is paradoxically enough held even by the most violent and radical of Muslims. Sayyid Qutb, the Egyptian Muslim theorist, whose writings are revered by radical Muslims today, by terrorists today, he wrote and insisted that Islam is a religion of peace. When you study his writings, it becomes clear that he meant that Islam is dedicated to establishing the hegemony of Islamic law over the world. When that hegemony is established, peace will reign in the world. Therefore, Islam is a religion of peace.
But the problem is the peaceful Muslims don't understand the edicts that comes out of the jurisprudence of Islam. If you look at the interpretation of these verses in Al-Azhar University, in the Islamic Sharia schools in Jerusalem, in Jordan, in Syria, and Damascus, all throughout the Middle East, the jurisprudence of Islam clearly state, emphatically, that the verse of the sword made null and void all the peaceful verses. And what does the verse of the sword say?
Then when the sacred months have passed, then kill the mushrikun, unbelievers, wherever you find them, and capture them and besiege them, and prepare for them each and every ambush. But if they repent and perform as-salat, the Islamic prayers, and give zakat, alms, then leave their way free. Verily, Allah is oft-forgiving, most merciful.
Kill them when you see them, wherever you find them. This is not an allegoric kill. It's a literal kill. It's the killing of Zarqawi, right in front of the camera. It's the lynching that you see in Ramallah. It's the killing of over 1 million Sudanese in Sudan, cutting the hands and the feet from opposite sides. And here's the dilemma. The peaceful verse, even the peaceful verse that is quoted, even by Bush, the verse goes as follows. Whoever kills a life without just cause, or for doing mischief in the land, then as he killed the entire earth. You'll find the same verse in the Judeo-biblical tradition. But most Westerners never skip after that verse, which makes very clear, but as those who do mischief in the land, then cut their hands and their feet from opposite sides and crucify them, literally. And that's what you see what happened in Afghanistan. That's what you see what happened in Sudan. A huge amount of crucifixions and killings and beheadings and amputations and public assassinations. They really want to revive Islam as it used to be. This is why they call it Islamic fundamentalism.
The recompense of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and do mischief in the land is only that they shall be killed or crucified, or their hands and their feet be cut off on the opposite sides, or be exiled from the land. That is their disgrace in this world, and a great torment is theirs in the hereafter. The Prophet cut off the hands and feet of the men belonging to the tribe of Arina, and did not cauterize their bleeding limbs till they died.
There is no assurance of what is known in Christianity as salvation and assurance of being saved and guaranteeing going to heaven. However, there are certain things that can help. So if a Muslim, for instance, died while he was practicing jihad, he is supposed to go to paradise.
In the Islamist thinking, the assurance of your salvation is dying as a martyr. In accordance to the verse in the Quran, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٌ بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Do not think that the ones who die in the cause of Allah in jihad are dead, but are living. So this assures salvation.
This is the calculus behind modern suicide bombing. Many people will say, modern Muslim advocates will say, that Islam forbids suicide, and this is plainly dishonest, because all the advocates, all the defenders of suicide bombing in the Islamic world start out by saying this is not suicide. This is, the intention of the person is not to kill himself, the intention of the person is to kill others, and that is sanctioned because it is Islamic jihad. And if in the process they are killed themselves, that's an unavoidable consequence of their actions, and they will be rewarded with the reward of martyrs in paradise. Muslims who come to the United States and come to Western Europe with an idea that Sharia is the law of Allah, they look upon our freedom of religion, and they look upon the fact that non-Muslims are in power in the United States and in Western Europe, making laws, and making laws not on the basis of the law of Allah, but on the basis of consensus and free elections. They look upon all that as a manifestation of jahiliyyah, or unbelief, the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, as the times in any nation's history before it became Muslim. The most important thing that the West needs to know about Islam today is that it has a political character, and that it is not simply a religion, but it is a religion or a belief system that mandates warfare against unbelievers for the purpose of establishing a societal model that is absolutely incompatible with Western society.
So when you meet, in fight, jihad in Allah's cause, those who disbelieve, smite at their necks, till when you have killed and wounded many of them, then bind a bond firmly on them, take them as captives.
Hudna is a peace treaty, ceasefire. In Iraq, Sadr asked for Hudna because he knew he can't defeat Americans. You have Hudnas all over when the enemy is stronger than you are. But as soon as you gain strength, then you don't concede for peace. This is why the face of Islamic fundamentalism in the West has a facade that Islam is a peaceful religion, because they are waiting to have more Islamic immigrants, they're waiting to increase in number, waiting to increase in political power, and once they do, then look out. You'll see the real face of Islamic fundamentalism here in America.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
The Quran has 164 verses on jihad. According to the Encyclopedia of Religion, Allah corresponds to the Babylonian god Baal, another name for Lucifer. Okay, let's look at Catholicism. So the priest says he turns wine and bread into literal flesh and blood every time you take Mass. For one, that's cannibalism and vampirism. Secondly, when you eat it and drink it, it's still bread and wine. Maybe you should lift it higher.
The dogma of purgatory is another abomination. For centuries, the payment of money was to have brought deliverance from purgatory. That practice eventually troubled Martin Luther's conscience and sparked the Reformation. Who can forget the infamous sales pitch of the Dominican friar Tetzel, commissioned by Pope Leo X to reap a fortune for Rome? Quote, "As soon as a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs," unquote. With such fraudulently obtained money, St. Peter's Cathedral was built and repaired. This was nothing new. Rome had consistently sold salvation for centuries. Popes published lists of every crime from incest to piracy to murder, and the price for which the Church would give absolution for each. For example, a deacon guilty of murder could be absolved for 20 crowns. Similar practices continue in Roman Catholicism to this day. This is a Mass card obtainable from any mortuary. Fill in your name and the name of the deceased. In exchange for an offering, the priest will place the card on the altar when he says Mass, allegedly reducing the time of suffering for the deceased in purgatory. Of course, the Church makes no guarantee as to how much the suffering will be shortened, nor how many more Masses must be said before the gates of heaven can be opened. Consequently, multiple Masses are purchased in the hope that eventually there will be enough. A friend told me that at his father's funeral, more than $2,000 in Mass cards were purchased. What kind of God grants special favors to those who possess a scapular or medal blessed by a priest or bishop and used on a feast day of Peter or Paul? Roman Catholicism has created literal harlots by the millions. Innumerable celibate priests, bishops, cardinals, and popes throughout history have had their lovers. There were popes who were the sons of supposedly celibate popes. Pope Silverius was fathered by Pope Hormisdas, and John XI by Sergius III. The list of bastards who ruled the Church includes Popes Boniface I, Gelasius, Agapetus, Theodore, Adrian IV, and others. No wonder Pope Pius II, who himself fathered illegitimate